Good afternoon and welcome to Wellington's webinar for March. Today we're going to be focusing on PMO maturity and really looking at what it is and some perspectives from some of our PMO superheroes that we have out there already in the industry. My name is Emma-Ruth Pemberton. I'm the Director of Consulting Services at Wellington. I'm a PMO specialist and my PMO specialism spans across many different associations, including the Association for Project Management, the Project Management Institute, and International Project Management Association. And also it extends into the charitable sector with a number of different organisations, most notably Project Management for Change, where we run their Project Management Day of Service here in Europe. If you haven't heard about Wellington and this is the first time joining us on one of our webinars, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about us. So we are a project management consultancy firm, and we are based in Windsor. Our head office is in Windsor in the UK. Hello to those of you who have joined us from afar. We also have offices in Dublin and in Madrid. And we also have a partnership with a consultancy firm in Costa Rica who helps to deliver some of our training courses over in Latin America. Our goal is to enable our clients to make a step change in their project management maturity. And we do this through a number of different services, including technology. We are uniquely the only Microsoft Gold accredited partner with the project management specialism, who is also accredited by the APM, the Association for Project Management. We work in the consultancy space, helping people to develop their project management maturity, a lot of the time through the development or transformation of PMOs. In terms of training, we do all sorts of training from technology through to APM courses, as well as some of our PMO courses, which are part of the PMO Academy, which this webinar is a part of. We run a number of conferences and events throughout the year. Our main conference is called Future PMO. It is designed for PMO people. So those of you that haven't heard of it, it's definitely one to look once we're all back up and running and able to have events all over the world. We run and write a number of reports and publications. Some of the data you will be seeing today is directly from some of our research. And you can find lots of articles and insights on PMO and much, much more on our website, the details of which I will give you at the end of this webinar. So today, like I said, this webinar is part of our PMO Academy series. The PMO Academy is kind of our place for everything PMO. This is where all of our PMO courses sit in, and we also explore a number of topics from all over the PMO world. Today is all about maturity, so we're going to explore what PMO maturity really is, what it actually means for PMOs. If somebody says you're at level X, what does that actually mean in reality? We're also going to talk about how Wellington measure maturity. This is something that we do with all of our clients, whether they're PMO clients or not. We do benchmark when we start working with somebody in order that we can go back and see if we've helped them to develop a step change in their maturity. We're also going to get some tips from our PMO superheroes. Those of you that are familiar with Future PMO, our conference is always themed. This year it will be all about superheroes, PMO superheroes to be precise. And we've asked some PMO superheroes for some of their tips and tricks on how they've managed to develop their project management maturity through their PMO implementation or transformation. So we've got some case study examples of some of the tactics that they've used to do that, so you can have a look at those today. And then lastly, we're going to look at how you can start your maturity journey, how you can understand roughly what level you're at and some of the things that you can do to get started on that journey. So first of all, we're going to talk about what maturity is. If we look at the definition of maturity, many people say it's all about age. When it comes to PMOs, that's not always the case. We have some PMOs that have been around for 10 or 15 years who actually are operating at a less mature level as one that might have been around for just 1 or 2 years. So if it's not about age, then where does maturity come from? It's not about us all being teenagers or not. The first thing to know about PMO is there is no one size fits all. So it can mean different things at different levels. If we look at an operational PMO, they might be doing 20 different services that they're offering the business, and they're doing them all at a very good level. Some areas need improving, as always, and some are already very developed. If we look at a strategic PMO, that's a very different beast. But just because they might only be doing 5 things that are more focused on the strategic objectives and planning of the organization, does that mean that they're doing things in a less mature way? Not necessarily. If we look at an enterprise PMO that's overlooking everything that's happening around change and strategy and planning for the organization, it really doesn't mean that they are more mature than the operational PMO. The enterprise PMO may well be working on 27 things, but those 27 things, they might not be doing them that well. Whereas an operational or a strategic PMO, they might do less things because they are more focused on a specific area of the business, but they may well be doing it in a much more mature way. So if it's not about age and it's not really about what we do necessarily in terms of how many services we offer our businesses, then what is it about? And at Wellington, we believe maturity is all about how well you do the functions that are valued by your customers. Your PMO customers are fundamental in designing what PMO you need and the services that you should be offering them so that they can self-serve or they can select to use your services. So when we think about that, that changes the spectrum a little bit in terms of what maturity actually means. Does it mean we're really, really good at risk management? Not necessarily if our customers don't believe that that is a function that's valued by the business. So as we think about that, we need to consider, how do we get to understand how mature we can be in the future? And there's a 5-step process that we always say to people. The first one is think about strategy. What's the driver behind the PMO implementation or your transformation? Are you trying to change something because you believe it's broken? Or are you trying to change something because your customers believe something needs fixing? Are you implementing a PMO because we've got new leadership and they don't see where their budget is going? They can't necessarily understand what their people are doing. One of my favorite TED Talk speakers, Simon Sinek, talks about why, the golden circle of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And your strategy from a PMO perspective really needs to be tied into that. Why does your PMO exist today in your organization? And that's where your strategy should be derived from. It's really hard to understand where we're going from a maturity stance if we don't really have a vision for it. So that's always got to be the first step. The next step is to understand where you are today. What's your starting position? I've seen many PMOs that have started down the maturity journey and they've gone straight for, we want to be level 5 of 5. And then they create KPIs that are not really that attainable in the grand scheme of things. If our starting position of our projects should all have business cases is at 0, maybe putting in 100% of our projects should all have business cases in the next year is maybe a bit too far. So we need to make it realistic by understanding where we are today. If our starting position is 0, we'd probably be happy with 25%. And it's understanding that what is enough, and sometimes just enough is just enough, and we need to accept that and manage that expectation. The next step is to understand where you want to be. So we at Wellington, we always say we look 2 years out with our PMO clients. Why? Because we live in this VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So if you look out much further than 2 years, the world will have changed. So we tend to focus on a 2-year journey with a kind of a look at how we're doing after the first year. So where do we want to be? What's the vision for the future? And really understanding what success looks like. Not just going forward without understanding that. What that means is we end up taking a really weird path towards something that isn't actually defined, which means we never really will know what the end result will look like or whether we've added value to our customers. and ultimately whether we've matured. The next step is to put an action plan in place. So how will we get there? A plan that's realistic, like I say. If our starting position is 0, maybe we shouldn't go for 100% on day 1 as a target. We need to keep our people motivated, so our action plans need to reflect reality. In the same vein, if we're a very operational PMO and one of our targets is to get into the strategic room of the organization and help to develop our portfolios, is that realistic to do in 2 years? Or is that a really hard room to get into if we are very operational at the moment? So we do need to get rid of our optimism bias, which we all have as humans, where we believe we can achieve more than we can. It happens to all of us. And really think about, let's stretch ourselves, but let's also make it realistic given our current reality. And the last step is to go back and see how well we did. So we need to assess, understand if we've been successful, go back to that, what does success look like? Have we achieved what we thought we were going to achieve? And what's interesting is that when we coach project and program managers in PMO, we often tell them to go through this process when they're planning their project. We get the why, we understand the as is, where are we today? We get them to do a view of what's the output, what's the scope, what are the benefits? How are we going to get there? They put a plan together and understand how well did we do after the fact. What's really interesting is that a lot of PMOs don't go through this process themselves. If somebody gets asked to develop a PMO, quite often we go straight into delivery. It's very rare for me to walk into an organization and see a business case for the PMO. So we need to really take a step back and in some ways understand that what we're selling to our customers is actually what we should be using as well in order to drive. Just because we're in PMO doesn't mean that we know better than the processes that we've got in place. At Wellington, we always say run a PMO implementation like a program. If you're going to do that, you need a business case for that program, and you will naturally go through this whole process. And this is where we start to see real maturity. How does that translate into measuring actual maturity? So first of all, I wanted to give you some stats from our State of Project Management survey. We can see here that 64% of PMOs believe that they're operating at a level 2 or 3 out of 5. 18%, interestingly, believe that they're operating at a level 1 out of 5. So there's still quite a big delta between level 1 and everything else. So quite a few are still very immature when it comes to maturity. What's interesting is then that when we ask senior teams and PMO people if they're satisfied with their level of maturity at the moment, they say only 32%, so just over a third of PMO, or just under a third of PMOs say that they are actually satisfied, which again leaves a really big delta of people who know there's improvements to be made. One of my favorite stats is the perception of value of PMO as a business partner. If we look at 2018 stats, 48% of respondents said that they believed that the value of their PMO would go up over time. Now we're at 72%. So we're now starting to see that PMO is becoming a critical enabler to effective delivery. So we need to make sure that this is something we are now focusing on. 72% is a lot. It's a very high number of people saying, yeah, no, we understand and we believe that the value will grow, or the perception of value will grow. So how do we do it? We combined 3 key questions. The first one is to do with people. So what do your customers think you should be doing? That's the first question that if you're going to do any maturity work, you really need to understand, because it's all about perspective. And my perspective of what value is and what my PMO should be doing will be very different, maybe, to some of my key customers. So one of the key questions that we need to ask is, what do the customers think you should be doing? It's not very good if you develop a Ferrari PMO and they just wanted a horse and cart. In terms of tools, we look at what direction have your project managers and program managers and PMO being given. What theory is at the disposal of people delivering and managing change in your organization to really get a feel for how complex or how simple are we expecting it to be. And then the third part is the practice, is what's the reality, what's actually happening when we look at real projects and programs. And let me tell you that those three are very rarely aligned. Quite often the tools and the theory are in place. What's really happening is people are doing it their own way anyway, and the customers believe you should be doing something totally different to what you believe you should be doing. So it's very interesting to get those three questions answered as part of maturity assessments. And we do that with a P3M3 badge. We do P3M3 assessments, and we also have our own, which is much more focused and detailed on the PMO aspects of project management maturity. The results will be one of 5 levels. We are fully aligned with all of the other maturity levels in that there are 5. And what we've done is we've made it more PMO specific for this webinar and for some of our clients. So we can see here at level 1, there aren't really any defined processes. There's usually not a PMO team in place. There might be some PMO skills that are happening around the business, but they're unlikely to be a full-on team, or if there is, it will be a very young team. And there aren't really any measures tracking project or PMO performance. At level 2, there are usually pockets of excellence in terms of PMO, and there will be some processes written down, but it's really largely down to the individuals who are delivering the PMO and delivering change to apply those processes. There will be some defined skill sets in the organisation, but not necessarily within a dedicated PMO function. So it might be that we've got somebody in finance who's doing project accounting, somebody in audit who's doing project assurance, but they won't necessarily be all talking to each other regularly. At level 2, what we tend to find is there aren't really any measures in place. It feels more of a firefighting, a more chaotic environment when it comes to PMO. We tend to spend a lot more time kind of running around trying to get data. At level 3, we can see that all of our processes in PMO are detailed, educated, and repeatable. So if somebody does join the organisation, there's a place for them to come that shows them this is how we expect you to run projects. There is usually a PMO in place, which is providing guidance and also some limited education through some formal training courses, maybe some mentoring or coaching of the project delivery teams. And there is some measurement of some high-level KPIs, which are communicated to direct management. And those KPIs tend to be focused on project delivery. At level 4, all of our processes are embedded and utilised consistently. That's one of the key drivers for level 4 across any maturity model that you will find, is that consistency element. There's always, 99% of the time, a dedicated PMO function which really enables communication in the delivery space, learning, and really they drive a culture of change. There's a consistent method to measure both projects and the PMO to senior management. Again, that's another key enabler for the PMO to be at level 4, in that we're not just delivering metrics on project delivery, but actually on how the PMO is delivering its own service catalogue. And then finally, at level 5, all of our processes are fully embedded. They're continually reviewed and improved using data and benchmarking. The PMO at this stage is usually a centre of competence, and there's usually a career path for professionals, which includes the PMO. What we do find in kind of lower maturity levels is there'll be a career path into project management, but PMO isn't quite often recognised as a specific skill set. And the performance of projects in the PMO helps to inform decision making. Like I say, we're looking for benchmarking, we're looking for trends to really improve what we do. So by going through a maturity assessment, you will get one of these levels or somewhere in between. Most of the clients that I tend to work with, they kind of start in at level 2 because they have some pockets of excellence and they know that they need to improve. And then those that come to us at kind of level 4, they're really trying to become business partners. They're really trying to push it to the next level. The really important thing to say about this is that this is a journey. So to get from one level to the other, it can take 18 months to 24 months sometimes, because each one of these steps really defines a culture change for the organization. It really defines something that we need to think about change management, which is one of the reasons why we say run a PMO implementation or transformation as a program, because you're going to be dealing with change management. You're fundamentally changing the way that people work and live their lives. So now we understand what maturity is. I mentioned earlier that I went out to some of our PMO superheroes that we have in our network, in our hive mind, as I'd like to call it, and really getting some examples of some of the stuff that they've done that's really helped them to do big things with their PMO, and also to get you some hints and tips. So we've got three different industries here that we can see some specific examples. So we have a retail example where their PMO, it was a transformation PMO. It wasn't being set up from scratch. And the way that they approached it was to create a community infrastructure. For them, it was really important. They were working across many different countries, many different languages. So it was really important for them to create a global community infrastructure. They also developed a HR-based career path. So they didn't do this on their own as a PMO. They actually worked with human resources to develop a career path to support people through project management into PMO. And that was also a journey for people. It was 18 months to 2 years before they were recognized as full-on project managers and then thinking about moving into PMO. It really was an experiential route for people to work through with the business, with their line management, to really develop themselves personally and professionally. They also had dedicated PMO business partners. So we know that all different areas of the business have to work in a different way. We certainly wouldn't expect our IT, information technology departments to work in the same way as finance. So they had business partners who were dedicated, who were SMEs and really understood how each of the business functions worked. That enabled them to make sure that all of their processes, ways of working, all of their templates were really tuned into the differences between the different departments. So it made sure that everybody was speaking the same language, regardless of the fact that they're working in a completely different way. One of the really interesting things that they did for their community is they made it subscriber based. So rather than the PMO pushing information out and pushing training and coaching out and templates and things, they actually allowed people to subscribe to them. So it became a pull situation. And this was a really interesting approach in the sense that the PMO didn't ever feel like they were sending communication out to people who weren't interested. But what did happen is that people who really surprised them were the ones that did subscribe. They were genuinely interested in what was happening in the world of project management in that organization. And they were able to subscribe themselves to training and to events. And within that, they were able to do global community events where things happened in different countries at the same time, and they had webcams on so people could get perspectives from all over the world. The other thing that they did is they made reporting self-service. One of the things we always say at Wellington is to enable yourself with technology. There's lots out there nowadays, and they really were able to lever reporting tooling so that people could go and do their own thing. If they wanted to, halfway through the month, go and see how their particular program of work was going, they could go, they could see the data there and then. Self-service reporting took a while. It usually takes 3 or 4 months for people to get the idea that there isn't going to be a really nice weighty deck of reports that lands on the desk every month. But once you get people into that mindset, it becomes a lot more powerful than the static kind of reports that we tend to use in most PMOs. That PMO went from being kind of a UK PMO to a globally recognized PMO within that organization. They really were seen as a business partner. They supported the planning and operating model development of the business as a whole. So they really, really took their PMO to the higher echelons of the organization. Even though originally they were looking after one particular area, they were able to move themselves over time and, really importantly, focused a lot on people to be able to get into that strategic space. The next one was in a manufacturing industry or company, and they were creating a PMO from scratch. And one of the drivers for these guys was they'd had a KPMG audit, which had highlighted that they weren't really very good at project management and doing that in a consistent way. So they created a number of different things, a communications-based portal. So rather than facts and figures, it was more about communications and meeting the team and understanding what was happening. They did some process refinement, and what's interesting is they aligned it to their manufacturing process. So regardless of whether we call it concept, planning, delivery, and handover, they aligned all of their language to the organization's manufacturing process. So anybody looking at any of the documentation would understand what part of the process this project was in. And that's a really important point, is to speak their language. They also defined and designed some PPM tooling to really help them to automate as much as possible from a reporting and governance perspectives. And the whole governance model was redesigned with conduit partners. So this was a group of companies and they needed to have some conduits to be able to really translate from one of the group companies to the other. One of the key things in terms of a case study that they saw was a several point jump on the KPMG audit the following year. So by doing this kind of work, there was a real tangible uplift in their audit scoring. So something really, really interesting that the team could go and say, yeah, we did this by actually putting in a PMO from scratch. And an example from the public sector, so community-based operating model, there's a theme, you can see there's starting to be a theme, which is all about community and people. And they really developed an outcome-based service model, a service model that was really focused on what behaviors are we going and willing and able to change. They also created a web-based finance application because that was one of their key challenges, was project accounting. And they created a portal gateway for PMO, so anybody coming into kind of, you know, this is your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about PMO, whether it's support, whether it's templates, whether it's guidance, whether it's training. And they also had dedicated change specialists that they put into place, and they won awards with the work that they did to really turn that PMO and project delivery around. Now, some of those people and some more gave us some insights, some hints and key tips that you can use to become one of our PMO superheroes. So one of the people who responded was from a training company, and they really said, get your own skills in gear, ensure that your team is up to speed with the industry, and don't shy away from investing. Our world is changing all the time. So it's really important that we invest in our people and we don't just take the approach of, oh, you'll be fine, you'll figure it out. We need to make sure that if you really want to mature your PMO, is that we're getting the right skills into the team. The next one was from a consulting company, which was really interesting because they really talked about changing your perspective and almost make it personal. If this was your company, how would you do it? What would you want to see? How would you want to be engaged? And if you do that, you really reframe the whole situation in your head, because it's more personal, and you tend to then be more inclined to do things in a slightly different way. Maybe, you know, we might listen to our customers a little bit more. Maybe we might ask for more information. From an education provider, they really said, think bigger. Don't be afraid to aim for the stars. You might have to stretch to reach that high, but don't be afraid to think bigger and to really push yourselves. For a food manufacturing company, they said, be an integrator. We know one of our PMO principles is that PMOs bring people together, they bring data information together. And really to pull on that is bring expertise from different areas, and you'll create a project management bricolage kind of environment where we're using people's skills regardless of where they sit in the organization. You've probably got some Lean Six Sigma black belts in your organization because we were all trained that way a few years ago when it was fashionable. And so, but we don't use those skills anymore because we don't think about it. So really bring in, if you have process work to do, bring in somebody that can really help you to do that well. And from a kind of science and research company, they said really lead from behind. Let the team navigate your transformation so that they can grow. You don't have to be the owner of all the good ideas. It actually helps you to take a step back and see further ahead if you actually let other people do some of the thinking and to let people give you their opinion of how things are working or not. And the last topic that I just wanted to cover off very briefly is this is how you can start your journey. So the first one, for those of you on the webinar, you will be receiving a link, so you will see a benchmark version of our maturity assessment. And if you fill that in, it's just a quick survey. It'll only take you a few minutes. You will get a report back that allows you to have an indication of what your current level of maturity is currently at. There will be some recommendations in there. And one of the next things that we would recommend is that you undertake an exercise to critically assess the performance of your current service catalogue and identify ways to improve, and also identify the things that you're doing really well so you can shout about it. Understand and define what success looks like, both from your perspective and that of your customers. Remember that it's not always going to be the same. Number 4, you have to commit. So create a plan that everybody signs up to so that you can start gaining those maturity points, especially now we're all working from home at the moment, I'm sure all over the world. So now's the time, you know, to take a step back and really start to think about the future. And 5, communicate. We're not very good at communicating in PMO within our organizations. We're not brilliant at shouting about the good things that we do. So we always say that use the value life cycle to communicate with your customers. The value life cycle from a Wellingtone perspective, we always say the first one is to capture the value. Understand what value means to your organization and your customers. Then you deliver that through your service catalogue. You measure it using some key metrics that sometimes you have to think outside of the box, but it can be done. And then you communicate. And quite often what we find is the reason why PMOs fail is that we don't communicate enough. People don't see the good work that we do because we're in the background, making everybody else look good quite often. So those are some hints and tips for you to get started on maturity. Do keep in touch, stay in touch with us. You can see contact details, and you can scan the QR code if you do want to stay in touch through LinkedIn. And you can search for me. I am PMO Ninjas. Why? Because we do things by stealth a lot of the time in PMO. We do things in the background. So do stay in touch with us. Thank you for joining. And just for fun, if you go to futurepmo.com, you can do a little quiz which will tell you which kind of PMO superhero you are. Thank you very much again for joining us today. I hope to speak to you all soon.